Today is March 19th. Welcome to Big Book Daily. My name is Rob. I am an alcoholic. It's a thrill, honor, and joy to be here with you today as we journey through the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous and the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions. Today we are going to be reading out of the Big Book, The Vicious Cycle, pages 227 through 229. And out of the 12 and 12, we're going to be reading Step 10, the first half of page 89. So with all that, hope you're doing well this morning. I'm doing great. Got my cup of coffee. Life is good. Let's go ahead and get to the good stuff. So if you'll recall from yesterday's reading, our narrator's finally starting to see a little bit of hope here. He and his sponsor Jackie have decided to go to the New York group and get a little bit of help and accountability. And at first, he mentions that the group's not super organized yet. Everyone kind of has their own kind of methods and everything. And the group will follow one person for a little while until they realize that doesn't work. And they follow another person's ideas for a little while and realize that doesn't work. And I like what it says at the bottom of page 227. Boy, what a circle of confused idealists. Yet we all had one really sincere purpose in our hearts, and that was not to drink. So that is the one thing that's kind of holding them together here in this group. And Bill, the founder of AA, is one of those people. And Hank was this narrator's former boss. And he's part of this group as well. So it's pretty neat. Small world, but pretty darn neat how things are working here. So we're going to build on that. We're going to be reading pages 227 through 229 today. Bottom of page 227. At our weekly meeting, I was a menace to serenity those first few months. For I took every opportunity to lambaste that spiritual angle, as we called it, or anything else that had any tinge of theology. Much later, I discovered the elders held many prayer meetings hoping to find a way to give me the heave-ho, but at the same time stay tolerant and spiritual. They did not seem to be getting an answer, for here I was staying sober and selling lots of auto polish, on which they were making 1,000% profit. So I rocked along my merry independent way until June, when I went out selling auto polish in New England. After a very good week, 2 of my customers took me to lunch on Saturday. We ordered sandwiches, and one man said, 3 beers. I let mine sit. After a bit, the other man said, 3 beers. I let that sit too. Then it was my turn. I ordered 3 beers. But this time it was different. I had a cash investment of 30 cents, and on $10 a week salary, that's a big thing. So I drank all 3 beers, one after another, and said, I'll be seeing you boys. Went around the corner for a bottle. I never saw either of them again. I had completely forgotten the January 8th when I found the fellowship, and I spent the next 4 days wandering around New England half drunk, by which I mean I couldn't get drunk and I couldn't get sober. I tried to contact the boys in New York, but telegrams bounced right back, and when I finally got Hank on the telephone, he fired me right then. This was when I really took my first good look at myself. My loneliness was worse than it had ever been before. For now, even my own kind had turned against me. This time it really hurt, more than any hangover I ever had. My brilliant agnosticism vanished, and I saw for the first time that those who really believed, or at least honestly tried to find a power greater than themselves, were much more composed and contented than I had ever been. And they seemed to have a degree of happiness that I had never known. Peddling off my polished samples for expenses, I crawled back to New York a few days later in very chastened frame of mind. When the others saw my altered attitude, they took me back in. But for me, they had to make it tough. If they hadn't, I don't think I ever would have stuck it out. Once again, there was a challenge of a tough job, but this time, I was determined to follow through. For a long time, the only higher power that I could concede was the power of the group. But this was far more than I ever recognized before. And it was at least a beginning. It was also an ending, for never since June 16th, 1938, have I had to walk alone. Around this time, our AA Big Book was being written, and it all became much simpler. We had a definite formula that some 60 of us had agreed was the middle course for all alcoholics who wanted sobriety. And that formula had not been changed one iota down through the years. I don't think the boys were completely convinced of my personality change, for they fought shy of including my story in the book. So my only contribution to their literary efforts was my firm conviction, since I was still a theological rebel, that the word God should be qualified with the phrase, as we understand him. But that was the only way that I could accept spirituality. Okay, some great stuff there. Can't wait to talk about that in just a minute. Alright, so out of the 12 and 12, we are in step 10, which is continue to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. Yesterday we talked about the emotional hangover, the direct result of yesterday's and sometimes today's excesses of negative emotions like anger, fear, jealousy, all the not so good stuff. And I really love this line from yesterday's reading. If we would live serenely today and tomorrow, we certainly need to eliminate these hangovers. This doesn't mean that we need to wander morbidly around in the past. It requires an admission and correction of errors now. And there's those italics again. Anytime you see those in the big book in the 12 and 12, know those are certainly important. So we can do this now. And the first paragraph we're going to read today builds on that idea. So let's get right to it. Although all inventories are alike in principle, the time factor does distinguish one from another. There's the spot check inventory, taken at any time of the day. Whenever we find ourselves getting tangled up, there's the one that we take at the day's end, when we review the happenings of the hours just past. Here, we cast up a balance sheet, crediting ourselves with things well done and chalking up debits where due. Then there are those occasions when alone, or in the company of our sponsor or spiritual advisor, we make a careful review of our progress since the last time. Many AAs go in for annual or semi-annual house cleanings. Many of us also like the experience of an occasional retreat from the outside world, where we can quiet down for an undisturbed day or so of the self-overhaul and meditation. All right, once again, great reading here. I love the spot check inventory. As I was saying yesterday, somebody told me one time, we can begin our day over again at any time throughout the day. We don't have to let one single moment or one single resentment ruin the entire day. And I think that's where the spot check inventory certainly can be beneficial. And we talked about that yesterday. It can be taken at any time of the day, whenever we find ourselves getting tangled up. And then there's one that we can take at the day's end. I'm not so great at this one. I need to improve a little bit. I journal sometimes, but I don't really go through every event of the day and chalk up, the positives and the negatives. That's something I definitely want to put into practice this week, today. Here we cast up a balance sheet, crediting ourselves with things well done, chalking up the debits where due. In a way I do that in the mornings, but I'd like to do that in the evenings as well. And then I can definitely relate to the last sentence. Many of us also like the experience of an occasional retreat from the outside world, where we can quiet down for an undisturbed day or so of self-overhaul and meditation. Now, my wife gave me this idea one time. Where I work, I'm around people all day, and I love people. I'm a people pleaser, but I'm also an introvert, so people wear me out. And sometimes I just got to get away, and it's not because of them. It's just my personality. I recharge when I'm outside, when I'm in the woods or whatever. Just when it's peace and quiet, I can recharge my batteries. So my wife said, well, why don't you just do that during your lunch? And so this was probably about 3-4 years ago. I said, okay, yeah, actually, I know a perfect spot. So she calls it my Serenity lunch. And I love it. So I basically, I'm putting out fires all day, and I don't say that resentfully. That's just part of the job. I'm putting out fires all day. I try to do the best I can to serve others. And then around 12:05 each and every day, I go to my one spot for about 20-25 minutes, and I just sit and be. A lot of times I eat my lunch early on the clock, and then I go out there and just sit and be. Do that a little, sometimes I'm out there to think and maybe do that inventory. Sometimes I'm just out there to clear my mind and not think about anything. look at the beautiful blue sky or trees and the squirrels and the birds, just getting my mind off of all the tedious things that I do throughout the day that can often build up into something stressful. But that little retreat right there, by the time I get back in the building, I'm recharged and I'm ready to go for that second half. So I'm not saying that you have to do what I do. I'm just saying that I found something that works for me. And we're all going to have something different that works for us to be the best people we can be. And going back to the big book real fast, boy, I love that our narrator, he went back out again. And the group was very apprehensive about bringing him back. They weren't convinced that really he'd had a spiritual transformation or anything like that. But from what I see here in the testimony, he starts to realize, well, they can't all be wrong. And at least at the time that this story was written, he chooses his group to be his higher power for now. And I think that's a beautiful way to put it. And then I didn't know this, that this person was, his testimony reveals that he came up with the line of God as we understand him. I really like what somebody said to me when I first came into the fellowships. He said, don't try to figure the spiritual stuff out right away. Just keep coming back. You learn as you go, one step at a time. And we hear all these cliches, but they do take on new meaning sometimes in our lives. You ever read a book or the Bible or any other book where you read one passage, you get something one day, and then you read the same passage the next day, you get something completely different? That's how some of these cliches are for me. I kept coming back, and eventually my outlook on my higher power started to shift and started to change, especially when I started to go through the big book for the first time with a trusted spiritual advisor and work some of these steps and get honest with myself and make these amends and do things I'd never done before, really examine why I do some of the things I do. But it was a process and it took time. So for me, the fellowship alone was what got me through for a while. And that sounds kind of like what's happening to our friend here. So whatever your stance is on God or at a creative intelligence, whatever you want to call it, just keep coming back. You learn as you go. As always, I try to say I don't speak on behalf of AA, NA, Al-Anon, any other organization. I don't. I'm just a grateful recovering alcoholic reading 2 books that mean a lot to me. And once again, I've read the big book. I've read the 12 and 12 before, but as I'm reading it again this year, I'm already getting so many new things. It's amazing how this stuff works. I am honored to be here. I'm honored that you're here with me in this Lifeboat Recovery, and I look forward to seeing you back here tomorrow.